Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. It's ECM. I am really excited to be here with you guys today. I have a list. Again, I have to say, this is all kind of fascinating the way all the timing of this is playing out. My hair is a disaster today. Sorry. There was a running joke back when we were on Facebook. Shh, stop. I know you get excited. There was a running joke back when we were on Facebook 5 days a week that I would always come on here and adjust my hair. So I'm like very, I'm very conscious of it these days, like starting up the habit again of suddenly seeing myself like live on camera and being like, oh my God, my hair. In any event, it's ECM. Welcome to Resistance Live. Please welcome Donut, the dog, who is very excited every time the camera goes live. And the whole reason why he's showing up in the thumbnails is because he also hates my still camera. So it's a fascinating thing. They get very excited. Anyhow, welcome. As always, I am ECM. My pronouns are she, her. I am coming to you, as always, from occupied Tongva land. Today I'm wearing a kind of like tan, I don't know, shell of some kind as a t-shirt, short-sleeved. My hair is down. It's frizzy. I am a pink-skinned woman with green eyes, and I have my lips gloss on today, and I'm so glad you're all here. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you that there's kind of the stack of notes I have today is really extensive, and there's a lot of detail in them. So, I think the predominant question today is very much about what's going on with Mark Meadows. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that. I did want to mention one thing really quick at the top of the broadcast, which I think a lot of people already know here. And just as a heads up, on YouTube itself, if you are subscribed, by the way, please hit that subscribe button if you have not hit it yet. I checked our stats yesterday, and like more than 50% of the people who are watching here on a regular basis are not yet subscribers. So please hit the subscribe button, like this broadcast because it helps with our distribution. So hit that thumbs up. And then don't forget to hit the bell notification so that you get notified every time we go live, including, by the way, when we're testing new streaming technology. That was an accident yesterday. Thank you for all of you who checked in with me and were like, why is there a broadcast that says test 2? That's why, because we were testing out some new tech to see what works and what doesn't. Okay, so first things first, as a result of everything being really wild here, as we mentioned in the community tab here on YouTube yesterday, as well as on Patreon and everywhere else, we are going to be back live 5 days a week starting Friday. And I know a lot of you are really, really excited about this because it means that we're back to having kind of like a 5-day-a-week daily update here. So the one thing I want to say about that is it's going to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday here on YouTube live, 5 days a week, 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern. Those of you who were here back in the day know that from time to time, I've got like things with my kids that, kind of get in the way of the actual time of the broadcast. Please know that if anything is up, I will post it in the community tab here on YouTube, which is for all of our subscribers. You will be able to see notifications there about things that are going on with the broadcast, as well as on Patreon. Even though we're going 5 days a week, the question thread is going to remain on Patreon as a perk for Patreon subscribers, as is our Sunday coffee hour. So if you want to ask questions in advance of the broadcast, please make sure you are subscribing on Patreon. It's a tiny fraction of the cost. It's like a dime for every broadcast when we're going 5 days a week to be over there. So as little as $2 a month, you can ask questions. You can participate in Sunday coffee hour, which is a lot more casual. It's kind of like an Ask Me Anything. And I would love to see you all over there. So please remember that your subscriptions help to support this work. They help to pay our team, which is made up exclusively of single mothers and trans folks. So, kick us some cash to help us out. That would be really awesome. And, you get all sorts of benefits for doing that. Okay. We're going to talk about Meadows because that was the bulk of the questions today. And I want everybody to really understand what's going on there. So there was this hearing on Monday that was ongoing while we were live that Meadows testified at with regard to what he was doing in relation to like the January 6th and fraudulent electors conspiracy to overthrow the federal government. And as I have mentioned repeatedly about this situation over the last few weeks, and Joyce Vance as well had a thread that said exactly what I've been saying for the last few weeks yesterday as well. One of the things you should be aware of is that there is a real debate about whether or not, booking phone calls that are designed to overthrow the federal election is within the scope of your employment as a federal official, okay? So some of what he was trying to do on Monday in his testimony was say, oh, I was just regularly on phone calls with the president. Oh, I regularly booked phone calls with the president. All of that is by the way, like an argument that we would have expected him to make, because you will remember, if you have been here, that there is a part of the reason why he is trying this. One of the reasons why he is trying this is because there is this statute that says if you are a federal employee, you are supposed to be able to remove your claims to federal court. I'm going to remind everybody that does not magically change the state crimes of which he is accused into federal crimes such that the pardon power would apply. Even if he is in federal court, he is still going to be tried on state crimes, all right? So he's not magically getting himself a pardon in the event that there is a Republican president elected in 2024, all right? That's not possible, okay? The real issue here is whether or not his next step is, if he succeeds in removing, is going to be to claim that he's got like some form of federal immunity. That is, I'm just going to tell you, highly unlikely, in part because so much of what he was doing here was outside the scope of his role as the chief of staff of the White House. And the big issue that is in play here is whether or not his work was political or whether it was in furtherance of his duties in service to the federal government. And I will just tell you, most of the lawyers that I'm talking to right now, and most of the lawyers who I also read, because I always back check my own opinions since the law is malleable and great legal minds can differ, all of us generally agree that the work that he was doing was in furtherance of the Trump campaign. It was not the work that you would normally do as the chief of staff of the White House, okay? You don't set up a call with Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State of Georgia, where you're going to ask him to find 11,000 plus votes in service of your duties as the chief of staff of the White House. That is political activity on behalf of the campaign, okay? So one of the things about his testimony on Monday is that he actually ended up kind of making some statements that are arguably very much against his interest as a criminal defendant, okay? He mentioned that he had been involved in certain phone calls. He mentioned that he had been involved in certain conversations that, by the way, I mean, I just have these moments, I actually think Mark Meadows is represented by fairly decent counsel, but I do have these moments where I'm like, man, you put this person on the stand at this particular moment, you're risking a lot. And why are you risking a lot? Because he might say things like, yeah, I was involved in setting up that phone call, when one of the accusations against you in the indictment in Georgia is one of the acts in furtherance of the RICO conspiracy was setting up a phone call between these people, okay? So in essence, he testified that he did that. And that in and of itself is something that is going to be admissible against him in a criminal trial. All right. The fact that he also was involved in offering money from the Trump campaign to help further the efforts to overthrow the election through this fraudulent elector scheme is something that is very clearly political. OK, so we had this really interesting development after all of the testimony that was given on Monday, yesterday, which is the federal judge in the Northern District of Georgia, who is overseeing this removal hearing, issued an order asking for further briefing. And the briefing request was basically this: I want the parties to submit briefs by Thursday, by tomorrow, telling me whether or not, if only one of the acts that was committed by Mark Meadows was in furtherance of his duties in the role of the White House, does the entire criminal prosecution of him have to be removed to federal court? Now, there's two ways to interpret this, all right? And I'm going to tell you which one I think is the most effective, all right? Or the most likely, rather. Not the most effective, the most likely. The two ways to interpret this are this. One, that the federal court judge has already determined, okay, that Mark Meadows has committed acts that were outside the scope of his duties as a federal employee, okay? Because you wouldn't be asking this question if the totality of what was before the judge was actions taken in furtherance of your employment as the chief of staff of the White House, okay? So that's one interpretation. The second interpretation is that he's determined already that none of these acts are in furtherance of the duties that Mark Meadows was perpetrating, was engaged in as chief of staff of the White House, okay? And that he's crossing his I's and dotting his T's and basically saying, even if one of these acts was committed in furtherance of these duties, that is not a basis to remove this case to federal court when everything else is obviously criminal, okay? So the two could, by the way, both of these things could be true at once, okay? So I want to make something really clear. We do not know what the conclusions are that are being reached by this judge, this federal court judge who's reviewing the removal petition. I'm going to tell you that I think the more likely aspect of this is item number 1. And the reason why that's the case is because Mark Meadows has made this argument that, you know, there are these certain things that he used to do when he was engaged in his duties in furtherance of Donald Trump, right? And some of those things may overlap, all right? I happen to think, though, that there is an extremely strong argument here that because of the political nature of everything involved in the RICO conspiracy, like the whole RICO conspiracy, by the way, like kudos to Fani Willis, is grounded in political conduct, all right? That even if he was setting up a call, and ordinarily setting up a call would be considered within the scope of the duties of the chief of staff, if setting up that call is in furtherance of the conspiracy, the case can't be removed. Now, this is all very complicated, all right? And I feel like I gotta remind everybody, because for the new people here or the people who may have forgotten it, I want to remind you that I feel like I do this every time we talk about this, and my elbows are crooked today, but we have a pyramid of courts in America, all right? We have one arm that's the state courts and one arm that's the federal courts, and they intersect at the Supreme Court, okay? One of the reasons why this judge is doing this is because no matter what happens here, at some point, this issue of removal is going to be appealed, and removal could potentially be subject to what's called an interlocutory appeal, which is where, even though the case isn't resolved yet, the issue is allowed to go up on appeal. Ordinarily, with most issues, you have to wait till the entire trial is over. So the federal court judge is very clearly already very mindful of the fact that the written opinion that he writes is going to be appealed at one point or another, and it may be appealed immediately depending on how it goes, all right? So the story here is not yet over. The other thing that I want everybody to be aware of is that from a strategic standpoint, a lot of the other defendants are watching to see what happens here. Okay, so we've got to talk next about the issue of severance, because while there is, an argument to be made here that Meadows' attempt to remove is a de facto severance motion, we have not seen all of the defendants ask for their trials to be severed. And what that means is they get trialed separately in a separate trial, all right? Fani Willis, magical prosecutor that she is, and I'm going to say this, I'm really against deification of lawyers, but she's doing a phenomenal job right now, has now asked for every single defendant to be tried on Ken Chesebro's trial date of October 23rd. She's like, let's go. That's basically where she is right now. She's like, okay, I know I said I wanted March 4th, but now March 4th is Jack Smith's trial date. So if we're going to try one defendant, we might as well try them all on October 23rd. She's amazing. All right. This is a strategy that I absolutely agree with. And it also, by the way, is calling everybody's bluff. It's saying she's totally ready and prepared. It is, I also have to just remind you all, some of you who have heard me talk about trial strategy generally before have heard me say this, but one of the ways in which, as a strategic matter, when you're at trial, and I used to do this all the time, this is a really effective strategy when you're trying to kind of put your defendant back on their, or your opposition back on their heels, is to essentially show up and flood the courtroom with effort. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if you're in a civil trial, you're going to file a motion to compel discovery if they don't respond the day that it's due. You're going to file motions in limine concerning their evidence. You're going to do your best to kind of overwhelm the lawyers on the other side of the fence, because that actually means that sometimes mistakes get made or balls get dropped. And, I used to do this all the time. And sometimes what would happen is that the arguments that would be made by the other side in opposition would be so shoddy and so underprepared that I would win. Okay. So one of the things that she's clearly doing here as a strategy is being like, I'm going to give you everything that you want. I'm going to give you all the documents in discovery. You can get ready. Every single one of these defendants has attorneys. Let's go. You want a speedy trial? Try me. That's essentially what she has done here, okay? We may, as a result of that effort, see various defendants seek to sever their trials from one another. So this morning, as a part of my research for this broadcast, I went and looked at the Georgia statutes that are in the law books on the issue of severance, all right? And I'm going to tell you what any one of these defendants have to prove in order to sever their trials from one another. Okay, so there are 3 factors to be considered under Georgia law when you're considering a motion to sever. They are the following. 1, whether the number of defendants creates confusion as to the law and the evidence to be applied to each. 2, whether a danger exists that the evidence admissible against one defendant might be considered against another, notwithstanding the instructions to the contrary, because there will be jury instructions to that effect. And 3, whether the defenses are antagonistic to each other or each other's rights. All right. So I'm just going to say one thing here. I don't think that there is any risk that the jury is not going to be able to determine the charges that are issued against every defendant, because if you look at the indictment, you know, like all the many pages of this, one of the things that is included on each indictment for each defendant here are the counts that they are charged with. Okay. So like Donald Trump, it says counts 1, 5, 9, 11, 13, 15, 17, 19, 27 to 29 to 38 to 39. All right. Each of those counts has their own evidence attached to it. And a very good prosecutor, as Fani Willis clearly is, will be able at the trial with her trial team to make sure that every single element of every single crime is established for the jury for every single defendant. All right. This is actually really not hard as a matter of trial strategy. I'm also just going to say, I don't see any issue right now of the defenses being antagonistic to one another. All right. I really don't see any risk of it. Nobody's out there saying like, I mean, you know, they may try to point fingers at each other right now, but at the moment, we do not have any defendant saying all of this is Mark Meadows' fault, right? Or all of this is the fault of the election official in Georgia who turned over the Cobb County voter data. Okay. Like we don't have anybody doing that Spider-Man thing of like, it's you, no, it's you. We don't have that happening. All right. It may happen at some point, but I'm going to remind you to sever these trials. All 3 of these elements have to be met with regard to every single defendant. All right. Now, the strongest argument here is that there's going to be some confusion because like it's a big trial and it's going to be messy and, you know, like blah, 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 blah. That one, maybe. But the problem is that like making out that particular element is not enough. Okay. You've got to make out all 3. And frankly, I think Fani Willis is calling a really serious bluff here. I think we're in a situation where because so much of the evidence is the same, okay, because the RICO conspiracy is alleged against every single defendant, there is an argument to be made that judicial resources and courtroom resources and jury resources and, you know, court staff time and all of that will be vastly reduced by trying everyone at once. So again, if there is a motion to sever, we're going to have to see exactly what happens, right? Each motion to sever is going to have to be considered on the basis of the various individual defendants who are asserting it, okay? But I don't think it's very likely. I really don't think it's very likely. I mean, we may see like 1 or 2 of these defendants seek to sever, but I think the chances are that like maybe not, you know? I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens there. All right. Okay. The Proud Boys sentencing hearing, 2 of the Proud Boys were supposed to be sentenced this morning, and that has been delayed due to what is being reported as an emergency. Somebody asked me on the question feed, like, do I have any insight into what that emergency could be? No, I do not. And I'm just going to tell you, this could be an emergency with the judge. It could be an emergency with the court reporter. It could be an emergency with one of the defendants. It could be an emergency with one of their counsel. We don't know. And, you know, I have to say this kind of thing happens all the time. It doesn't mean the sentence isn't going to be like rough. I'm going to remind everybody the prosecution is seeking between 27 to 33 years for each of these 4 Proud Boy defendants, including Enrico Tarrio. All that it means is there's going to be a delay of a few days. Nobody should get worried about that. Okay. It's not really like that big of a deal. Okay. I have a bunch of questions about state court matters. So before I turn to that, though, I want to answer the question about the Biden drugs order that was issued yesterday. Okay. So there were some questions about what's happened is that there's been an order issued now for Medicare to negotiate on the price of 10 specific drugs. All right. And there's a lot of hoopla about this because the pharmaceutical companies don't want to negotiate the price of some of these drugs. And I'm just going to tell you all, These are like life-saving drugs, okay? I went and looked at the list. You should go look at it too if you want to. But basically, these are drugs that deal with diabetes, strokes, heart failure, arthritis and other autoimmune diseases, Crohn's disease, which is also an autoimmune disease, and blood cancer, okay? These are drugs that are really designed to like keep people alive. And in some instances, the way that these drugs are priced right now is so serious that people are, I mean, this is like insulin again, but also like, you know, I've had friends and family members who have had to be on one of these autoimmune drugs that is used to treat arthritis and, you know, particularly arthritic inflammation and flares and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, like the cost is insane. Like we're talking like hundreds of dollars a month. So nobody should be up in arms about this. I'm also just going to say as a political matter, now I know like the pharmaceutical companies are up in arms about this. They were tweeting about it yesterday and, you know, all over social media about how unfair it is for them to kind of like have to reduce their prices so people can survive. But one of the things that I just want to mention here is that this is also a very smart strategic strategy on Biden's part. Why? Because on Trump's base skews much older than the Democratic Party base. And a lot of these drugs, okay, are very significant for senior citizens. If they are being, if it is Medicare that is negotiating them, that means people over the age of 65, all right? So it is smart politically, it is smart morally, and it is smart financially, okay? And, you know, I have to remind everybody, like, you know, the Republicans are running around out there going like, I can't believe we don't let anybody negotiate. This is socialized medicine, blah, blah, blah. The Department of Defense negotiates drugs all the time under like every stripe of president, all right? Like, this is not something unusual inside the federal government. This is not something that in general, you know, we should be worried about or concerned about. It's not going to put the pharmaceutical companies out of business. Like, God forbid that we had like socialized medicine for everyone, like every other like civilized nation, basically at this point. But, you know, I want everybody to kind of understand that this is a very strong strategic effort in advance of the 2024 election, as well as the fact that, you know, it's also smart for human life. Okay. So that's that. All right. Before I get to state court issues, I want to mention one other thing. The Wall Street Journal had this very interesting piece yesterday. And, you know, I'm not usually a fan of the Wall Street Journal because like Rupert Murdoch, but they had a very interesting piece yesterday about this new COVID variant that is on the rise that people are keeping an eye on. Okay. I'm going to remind everybody, there's a new vaccine coming within the next couple of weeks. There's a hearing date like middle of September. This is a booster shot for one of the latest variants of like XB11 something. I can't even keep track of these anymore. The Kraken variant is how it is referred to, okay? The new booster that is coming is armed for that variant. However, what the Wall Street Journal talked about yesterday is this brand new variant, which has some other insane name that have random epidemiologists given to it, that is on the rise. And it is considered to be one that is actually evading current vaccines, including potentially the vaccine that we're all going to get in September. So I just want to remind everyone right now, okay, because there is a really serious surge happening right now in California. There were schools shut down last week in the Midwest because of COVID surges. This is not over. It is not over by any stretch of the imagination. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but if you have gotten lax in your mask wearing in indoor environments, please put your mask back on, because you do not want to end up with one of these variants that is evading all of the vaccine protections that we already have coursing around in our bodies. Like, I think I've had 6 shots yet so far. I can't even keep track of all of this, but you know, I'm going to get another one and I'm still going to keep my mask on because there's this other variant circulating now that is like wild. Okay. So let's just all be very careful about this. And I just have to say, I've heard stories like this recently. I am very, very sorry about your 100-year-old aunt, but people are still dying of COVID and people need to be aware of it. All right. Like, and it's running around facilities right now. I mean, I have a friend who went into a facility in the Pacific Northwest and came out with COVID, visiting a family member. Okay. So there's so much of this going on right now. And I just really want everybody to be very mindful of the fact that, notwithstanding the fact that there's all this messaging going on right now, it's parolee. Thank you, Matthew. Matthew reminded me of this. The 2 variants are like parolee and Eris. They're the ones that have been designated by the WHO. And parolee is the one that was being discussed in the Wall Street Journal article yesterday. Okay, I want everybody to just be aware that like it's not over. And also your risk of long COVID goes up with every new COVID infection. All right. So you do not want to get it 3-4 times. I still have not had it. My older child has still not had it. Masking works, okay? All right. Let's talk for a minute about some state court developments. There's a bunch of stuff happening in Wisconsin right now because the brand new, newly elected Supreme Court justice in Wisconsin that has given the Supreme Court in Wisconsin a liberal majority has just been sat, meaning that like the liberal majority is operating now in Wisconsin. As we talked about last fall, for those of you who are subscribers back at that time when that election was underway, this is a very big deal. Like it's like a huge deal, okay? Because what it means is that there is now a liberal majority in charge of redistricting in Wisconsin, which is a massive swing state and has been artificially gerrymandered for a very long time under the control of Republicans. Now, Republicans are very upset about this. They, in fact, were making noises about trying to impeach this newly elected liberal Supreme Court justice before she even took the oath of office, okay? And by the way, there's also some drama happening within the Supreme Court itself because the Chief Justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court is a conservative woman who's really, really mad that the liberal majority of the Supreme Court has now taken over court administration, which, by the way, they are lawfully allowed to do. They have not done anything illegal. But she's losing her mind. She's been issuing these crazy letters about how they're exceeding their authority and they're undercutting her and what they're doing is illegal when it's not. Okay, so one of the things that I want, and by the way, like the Republican legislature in Wisconsin, there is a Democratic governor, stick a pin in that because I got to deal with that in a minute. The Republican legislature is like, we're going to impeach this woman and she's got to recuse herself from every case involving gerrymandering. Okay, I'm just going to point something out. A duly elected Supreme Court justice in a state that elects its Supreme Court justices does not have to recuse themselves from a gerrymandering case simply because they happen to be liberal. I mean, if that was the case, then nobody would ever be able to sit on a case about gerrymandering. Because you're running for election to the state Supreme Court as a Democrat or a Republican, as a liberal or a conservative. Everybody's got an opinion about gerrymandering. Yes, on the campaign trail, she said the state was artificially gerrymandered. I'm just going to tell you, I would bet there are some conservative Supreme Court justices who have been like totally happy on the campaign trail with the way in which the state has been districted. So all of this is like garbage. And basically it is. And I want everybody to just remember this, okay, because it's going to relate to something I'm going to talk about in another state in a minute. This is white panic about the loss of power over government institutions, all right? And we should see it for what it is, okay? It is a panic about the loss of power. And it is also, for those of you who have been here with me for almost 7 years, a form of extinction burst, okay? It is a panic about the loss of control, all right? And we're seeing a lot more of this in other places. Now, just to close the loop on this, all right? Even if they happen to impeach her, even if they successfully manage to impeach her, the Democratic governor names a replacement. He could name her to fill her seat again. There is a debate about whether the state constitution would allow that, but even if he doesn't do it for her, he can appoint another Democrat to the state Supreme Court until there's another election, all right? So there's not really any risk right now that there is not going to be a liberal majority on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, all right? And I just have to point out to everyone that we need to start calling out this panic where we see it. Okay, let's carry that over to another state where all of this is very clearly happening in another forum, Tennessee, all right? So we already had this situation, this appalling situation, which, by the way, earlier this year, I called as one of the most significant things that had happened in American democracy in 2023, where the Speaker of the State House of Tennessee tried to essentially like kick out Justin Jones and Justin Pearson, and they did not, of course, vote to remove their white woman ally who stood with them on the issue of gun control on the floor of the House, all right? As you will recall, they were reappointed to their seats, and then they were reelected to their seats. So they're not going anywhere, all right? And this is a hole that the GOP has dug themselves in Tennessee. And by the way, in case you thought they had come to their senses, they continue to keep digging. Yesterday, the GOP majority in the Tennessee State House forcibly silenced the parents who lost children in the school shooting that started this whole dynamic with regard to Justin Jones and Justin Pearson. They didn't allow them to speak on the floor of the House about pending legislation, all right? And on the way out of that event, the Speaker of the House body checked one of the Justins for holding up a sign. So, I got to tell you, this is a part of exactly the same dynamic, all right? It is white men, largely white men and some white women, panicking about the loss of the authority and the comfort of white supremacy that they have enjoyed their entire lives. And we are seeing this as a justification for all sorts of crazy stuff with regard to voting rights. We are seeing it writ large in Donald Trump's campaign for re-election. All right. It justifies all the actions of, it's not justifies, but it underlies all of the actions of Ron DeSantis. It is no shocker right now that, he is being badmouthed and heckled nonstop with regard to the recent shooting in Florida. The same is true of Governor Abbott and all of his actions with regard to seizure of power over trans people in the state of Texas. All of this is about a panic. Now, if you are wondering why, I'm going to point you to an article that came out yesterday that, and I was really excited about this, frankly. I'm really stoked about the future of America and Gen Z in particular, because Gen Z, the article was about demographics. And basically what it demonstrated was that Gen Z is the last white majority generation of America. I think that's awesome. And by the way, Gen Z knows what's up, okay? So there's no question that the demographics of America are tilting away from white majority leadership. And it's one of the reasons why there's such rabid gerrymandering, why they're all panicking, why they're trying to silence people. They want the population, particularly the white male population, armed with, concealed permitless carry. Why? Because it encourages violence against people of color. So all of this fits together exactly as they would prefer to be able to artificially maintain white supremacist power in America. And once you see it through that lens, it all becomes radically apparent what's happening with all of these people flipping out in the States. All right. So keep the lens very clear. Just keep it very clear because it is. It's very obvious. All right. Okay. Speaking of states, I do want to mention that, Hurricane Idalia has hit Florida. It's now headed for Georgia. Mass flooding is an issue. There are already deaths being reported in Florida. And by the way, it's looping back around. There is a possibility that this hurricane is going to hit Florida twice, which is okay, again, climate change is real. Please remember that. The waters off of Florida right now are 90 degrees. That's one of the reasons why these storms are getting ever more nasty. And, I want everybody, we have Florida watchers here. We have watchers in Georgia. We have watchers in South Carolina. Everybody is in the line of fire right now. Please take care of yourselves. One of the questions that I was just asked was about the fact that insurers have bailed on Florida, essentially. Okay. Many of you know that I have friends in Florida. Brandon Wolf is a friend of mine. Toby Gianluca, who's the Democratic safety head for St. Johns County, is a very good friend of mine. People are leaving Florida. And we've had a long debate on this broadcast about staying and fighting. I have to value those of you who are staying and fighting. I think it's incredibly important work. Brandon Wolf is staying in Florida and fighting for equality for LGBTQ plus people. He's amazing. He's an incredible advocate. I adore that man. And everybody's got to make it. Travis Akers also, yes. Donna Deegan is doing great work in Jacksonville. I just have to say, though, that I think that, everybody's going to have to individually make their own decision about this. And frankly, the fact that before too long, you're not going to be able to get a mortgage in Florida because you're not going to be able to get flood insurance is a real issue for a lot of people. Okay. So I think, folks, I'm not here to make your life decisions for you, but also if you have somebody on the feed this morning was I have a rising discomfort about the prospect of retiring here. You need to listen to that. You're going to have to make your own individual decisions about your own safety. And this is one way in which climate crisis is really real right now. I've been talking for a number of years now about the fact that climate migration, climate refugee status is going to be a really big deal in the next 30 years. And we're going to see a push to various areas of the country that are not going to be as adversely impacted by climate as some of these coastal and southern regions. All right. So, there's a piece in the LA Times from yesterday about the way climate change is impacting California. The fact that something like 80% of our state beaches could be gone by 2050. That's not all that far away. So these are real issues that everybody is having to deal with. And we're going to have to make the best choices for our families, the best choices for ourselves, the best choices for our financial picture. These considerations are real. And it's one reason, just have to say it, why folks like Vivek Ramaswamy are so profoundly dangerous. All right. Don't miss the fact that these climate deniers are profiting off of these crazy statements that they're making. They're also going to cost people their lives. Okay. So let's get really real on all of this and like understand that decisions are going to have to be made. And, you know, if you can't get insurance on your home in a given location, you can't sell it. All right. So people should start thinking about this stuff like now. All right. I mean, in fact, my friends already are thinking about these things. Okay. All right. We had a question about the E. Jean Carroll case. So I'm going to remind everybody we've got a second trial coming up in the E. Jean Carroll case in January. Somebody asked a question about when the judgment has to be paid. In essence, this depends on the claim, the orders of the court, the claims of which someone is found liable, and the exhaustion of appeals. All right. So he has been ordered to pay excessive amounts of money to E. Jean Carroll. It's great that he's probably going to be ordered to pay her more money. How that all plays out is very much dependent on the appeals process and also on the orders of the court. So there's no predicted timeline for him to have to pay the judgments against E. Jean Carroll at this moment. All right. However, I'm going to remind you that if he doesn't pay those judgments, his assets can be seized. And there can be asset forfeiture proceedings initiated by any civil person who is owed damages to seize the assets of that person to secure the damages award. Okay. I have long said, and this is not something that's going to happen in the E. Jean Carroll case because the award is minimal compared to this, but it would not surprise me to see at some point in the future, you know, I'm going to remind you all, we have a trial coming up for civil fraud related to like tax evasion in New York State, to see like Trump Tower seized by the state. You know, I don't think it's out of the question that property that's owned by the Trump organization, particularly, maybe it's not the whole tower, but I don't know, man, could be Trump's apartment, get seized by the state to be sold in a forfeiture proceeding to secure money judgment assets. All right. So all of this can take place. All right. Again, the timetable is really up for grabs. Okay. I have to answer this question, which I've answered before, but I just want to make it clear because this was something that was asked on the question feed this morning. This whole thing of how Trump can't go to prison because he has Secret Service protection is a lark. All right. No one has any idea how this is going to play out. All right. And there are tons of ways in which it could be arranged. Like, I think one of the things that people need to kind of like be mindful of is that this has never happened before in American history. Okay. We have never had a situation where a former president who is entitled to Secret Service protection for life could end up in the federal or the state pen. All right. But these things can be worked out. Okay. High profile individuals are held in solitary confinement. You know, there are ways in which Secret Service protection could be extended to him in prison. And, you know, I don't think anybody should be buying the argument that he can't do time because he's entitled to Secret Service protection. That's garbage. Like, it's just straight, flat garbage. All right. We don't know how it's going to play out. It's anybody's guess at this point, but there are means by which these things could be negotiated. All right. And that's all anybody really needs to know. Okay. It's also possible, it's not out of the question, that he could be ordered to serve his time on house arrest. I don't think that's likely to happen here, but I also want people to know, like, judges have done stranger things. And, you know, I just don't want anybody to be under the illusion that, like, a judge might not do that. It depends on the crime, right? But I'm going to tell you, like, if he's sentenced in Fani Willis's case to, like, the rest of his days in prison because of all the counts of which he's accused, they'll figure out a way to make it work with the Secret Service. All right? So, like, let's just deal with that. Laura, I am not bothered by the fact that taxpayers are going to pay for his incarceration. I'm not bothered by that at all. Like, not even close. And I have very strong feelings about the prison industrial complex. Like, I always have to say this. I'm an abolitionist at heart. Am I bothered by the idea that taxpayers are going to have to pay to keep Donald Trump in prison? No. Not even close. Not at all. Not in any way, shape, or form. Okay. Diana, I just want to answer this question you asked about Mar-a-Lago being sold to Junior. I addressed this in last week's broadcasts. There could be investigations into whether or not that asset was transferred to avoid the potential seizure of it for liability. And there are ways when you fraudulently transfer assets as an attempt to evade legal liability to have those assets seized anyway. All right. Those procedures are long and they're involved, but there are ways to claw back assets that have been artificially transferred to evade liability. All right. Okay. I think that's it for today. Final notes. As I mentioned at the top of the broadcast, we are back here 5 days a week starting Friday. Okay. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern, unless there's like some intervening factor of like a concert I have to attend for my kids or something like that, in which case you will be notified on the Patreon feed. If you are a Patreon subscriber, please go on over there and subscribe. I know lots of people are asking how you can kind of like support this broadcast. The most effective way is to become a subscriber over at patreon.com. It also gets you lots of perks, like being able to ask questions in advance of the broadcast, being able to get our Sunday coffee hour, and like swag coming at the upper tiers. I have to remind everybody, Britt and I were just emailing about this morning. Swag boxes, various other goodies. That stuff is kind of coming. So get on over to patreon.com and subscribe. Patreon.com/resistance live to subscribe. Also, we are closing registration on our fall reboot program on Sunday. Actually, I think it might be Monday. But you have a few days left to get in on that program at GaiaLeadershipProject.com/fall-reboot. That is our 6-week program that starts the day after Labor Day. So Tuesday. To really get your fall in order and get you back on your goals and figure out how you're going to make an impact between now and 2024. So I would love to see as many of you as possible in that program. There are payment plans available. I think there's still like a very limited number of slots to upgrade to private coaching with me for the duration of the program if you would care to. I know we had a couple more signups for that yesterday and it's limited to 10 slots. So we may only have one or two left now, but there's still at least 1 or 2 available. So you should get in on that if you would like to. And yeah, it's a big week. I'm excited for Friday. I will see you all here then at the absolute latest. Of course, breaking news broadcasts, as you always know, might bring me back. Please don't forget to hit subscribe, to like this broadcast, please. Share it with your friends if you think it is helpful. Feel free to drop it into your activist groups. I love you guys so much. We so appreciate all of your support, your viewership here, everything that you do to keep me and my team with food on the table and clothes on the backs of our kids, and to keep us all going. We are so grateful for that. And I'll see you guys all here on Friday at regular time, if not before. Okay? Much love, everybody. We think you're awesome. By the way, thank you to all of you who have been touting the broadcast on Threads and on Post and everywhere else. Forrest Linden, who I love madly. His wife is also an amazing woman. Gave us an incredible review yesterday on Threads. So thank you all so much for your feedback. I'm so grateful for you. And I'll see you guys here Friday. All right. Take care, everybody. Get